The Outreach Guide has been designed to assist service partners to build an outreach model within the research framework that is appropriate and adapted to the individual needs of older persons in their local community. Outreach is aimed at raising the profile of free and independent financial advice, generating conversations with older persons in local communities, and providing an avenue for seamless detection and referral of financial abuse. The Financial Protection Service recognises that there are concurrent risk factors leading to financial exclusion and financial abuse, and looks towards increasing financial resilience and social inclusion. These aims are more likely to be achieved if older persons are given time to establish trust through slower, locally adapted approaches to interactions. For services to be properly adapted, they must be based in locally adapted communication styles according to Louth. Louth says this takes time and patience and can't be a top-down approach. Because they are the experts in their local communities, service partners will develop their own outreach models. Financial protection services may be delivered through existing outreach, or a new outreach service can be created. The Outreach Guide will assist service partners to understand how conversations are the foundation of outreach, how to create an outreach model, and the best practice principles that should be adhered to during outreach. The work of Farrell for the Law and Justice Foundation review of Legal Aid New South Wales outreach services provided the framework for best practice principles. Some concepts have also been drawn from the introductory guide. This slide highlights 3 key best practice principles, although all the best practice principles should be kept in mind when undertaking outreach scoping and delivering outreach services. The key points are, firstly, outreach should be coordinated and collaborative. We have established financial information referral pathways to the National Seniors Financial Information Desk. We will discuss this referral pathway in the Referral Guide webinar. Service partners are also encouraged to build collaborative and coordinated referral networks with local pathways, for example, social work and/or legal services, where these aren't already provided in-house. Service partners may also choose to build coordinated service delivery, for example, undertaking outreach with local financial counselling services. The model has also been created in consultation with Financial Counselling Queensland to make it as easy as possible to deliver services together. Outreach involves building rapport within older person communities, and it may take time for older persons to begin to access the service regularly. Parachuting in fleetingly to a location or community gives outreach minimal chances to connect with people. Efforts should be made to ensure host organisation and people own the service as part of their community. Within larger communities, attention should be given to generating ownership within the host service. For example, an information or community legal education session could first be delivered to staff or management committee members who can then confidently promote and become problem noticers in the community. Taking a person-centred approach involves supporting autonomy by building on the individual's strengths and honouring their conscience, belief and values, which informs their choices, will and preferences, and ultimately underpins the exercise of their rights. Adopting a person-centred approach means that we should expect very few conversations with older persons to happen in the same way. The Communication Skills webinar, written by Helen Wallace, Senior Social Worker at Caxton Legal Centre, provides a practical overview of applying a person-centred approach to conversations with older persons. Each service partner will need to create their own outreach model for delivery of the Financial Protection Service. Financial protection services can also be provided during existing outreach. The Outreach Scoping Survey, which is located in the Practice Manual in Appendix A, has been created as a tool to help service partners create a locally adapted model. We will work through an Outreach Scoping Survey in this webinar, so service partners can get some practical guidance on using it. The Outreach Guide contains guidance on the Scoping Survey in Chapter 3 and on use of conversation during outreach in Chapter 4. Before we work through an outreach scoping survey, I'd like to make some preliminary points. Firstly, outreach comprises 2 stages. This is outreach and in-house services. Funding is intended to cover provision of both outreach and in-house services, and this means that some portion of funding will need to be set aside for in-house services like formal screening. This should be costed before the extent of outreach is decided upon. Outreach can include any service delivery by your service with the aim of making the financial protection service more accessible. This has been deliberately defined broadly because the research evidence supports the fact that services should fit the community, not be imposed on it. It means that if you already have a successful outreach service, you can use it to deliver the financial protection service. It also means that if for your community, in-house services are the most accessible way to provide financial protection services, then you can deliver services in-house. What we're expecting is that most models will have two stages. Firstly, outreach will be conducted as a financial information and referral service aimed at facilitating access to free and independent financial information and advice, and to conduct informal screening. This sort of outreach is more likely to be services such as community legal education talks and face-to-face information stalls. Secondly, in-house services undertaken for the purpose of providing formal screening and facilitated referrals for older persons at risk of financial abuse. We are expecting clients who are vulnerable to financial abuse to be referred in-house and supported through usual service partner operations. On this note, formal screening and facilitated referral should only be provided after the service user has become a client of the service partner. Usual intake processes for the SLAS or EAPSS service partner should be undertaken first. When your service is deciding on the outreach model, consideration must be given to screening. Taking into account the diverse models of outreach that are available, it's expected that only informal screening will occur during outreach, and formal screening will only occur after the service user has become a client. Formal screening and facilitated referral should only be undertaken when the conditions are ideal. This means the setting is private, comfortable, safe, and sensitive to the deficits in the older person due to normal aging processes. Consideration must be given to the interest, consent, and availability of the older person. Safety for both the financial protection service worker and the older person should also be carefully considered. The screening guide provides comprehensive information and can be used along with the scoping survey to decide the method and extent of screening during outreach. We will now work through an outreach scoping survey with reference to the outreach guide. If you want to have a copy of the outreach scoping survey in front of you, you'll find it at Appendix A of the practice manual. The first step is to survey need in your service area. And the purpose of this step is to, as far as possible, get a broad picture of older persons and the levels of socioeconomic and service need in the location your service covers. We're anticipating that this step will largely be informed by existing service partner knowledge. However, external resources such as statistics via the ABS, CEFA data, and the Queensland Government Statistician Office will also be useful. So, for example, in preparing for this hypothetical example, which is based in a metro area, we undertook a statistical snapshot of the demographic in Queensland. And from that, I was able to surmise a few things. Firstly, the average age for retirement in 2016 to 2017 was 55.3 years. Of those who had already retired from the workforce, 46% were aged 55 to 64. And those adults in the workforce who indicated they intended to retire on average at about 65 years. And so that means that potential service users in pre or early retirement are likely to range from about 50 to 65 years old. The Australian Bureau of Statistics Retirement and Retirement Intention Australia 2016 to 2017 survey indicates that the leading reasons for retirement were firstly reaching retirement age where the person was eligible for superannuation and or pension, and secondly, their own sickness, injury, or disability. This means that for many service users, they will either be facing a planned retirement or a forced retirement for health reasons. Because the Financial Protection Service aims to access people in communities rather than in their homes or workplaces, understanding how people use their leisure time provides a sound starting point for tailoring outreach services. The 2006 How Australians Use Their Time Australian Bureau of Statistics survey indicates that on average, older Australians spend a significant proportion of time on activities such as establishing a household or volunteering. The 2010 ABS Voluntary Work Survey estimated that 1 out of 3 people participated in voluntary work in Queensland in 2010, and that people aged 45 to 64 undertake extensive voluntary work, most frequently in sport and physical recreation, welfare and community, and religious groups. People in this age demographic also participate extensively through social groups such as sport and recreation, social clubs, and religious groups. And this means that social groups, volunteer organisations, and sporting associations are logical venues for outreach. Finally, given that health is a major cause of retirement, it made sense to look at hospital and health data for this demographic. The statistical snapshot confirms that people aged 50 to 70 are contributing to increased rates of hospitalisation in Queensland, and this is likely to be an upwards trend. So this means that where sickness is preempting retirement, hospitals and community health centres are logical venues for outreach. You'll see on the slide example, we're basing our hypothetical situation at a hospital dialysis unit. And this not only services older persons, but is leading to growth in the older person population in that suburb. The second step is to identify existing services in the area where outreach is proposed. In particular, local financial counselling, legal and social work services should be identified where these are not provided in-house. According to Farrell, identifying existing services may involve liaising with local communities to establish partnerships or obtain local knowledge about needs and the most appropriate location to target services, utilising existing professional networks. So, for example, the Regional Legal Assistance Forum and may provide avenues to obtain knowledge about local needs and existing services and opportunities for service delivery partnerships. Attending interagency meetings, where possible, to foster relationships with service partners in the community and establish what other services are offering in the area, and contacting possible referral pathway organisations. So that involves considering who it would be effective to contact to foster good relationships. In our outreach scoping survey example, the service has access to local allied services, referral relationships with financial counselling services, and social support contacts. Step 3 is to determine if it is feasible to deliver services in the area. Determining feasibility will include resource and staffing planning with reference to the funding amount. Service partners will also need to consider whether existing service practices are adequate to cover safety and WHS requirements and resourcing. In order to ensure that outreach is properly adapted, service partners should then identify the purpose of outreach before it's undertaken. So when identifying the purpose of outreach, Financial Protection Service should keep the following guidance in mind. The checklist on the screen has been adapted from Farrell's work for community legal education in Legal Aid New South Wales. So the first step is to keep in mind that outreach is aimed at older persons, although I would note that providing information to problem notices will also be a key way to promote the service. In terms of the when step, it refers to just in case and just in time outreach. Just-in-case outreach will have a more preventative focus to increase knowledge, to prevent problems occurring, or to build bridges to services should they be required in the future, according to Farrell. Just-in-time outreach aims to support self-help through immediately available assistance and is procedural in focus, helping raise people's awareness of problems they may currently face. This type of outreach is more likely to be face-to-face in nature, and Farrell notes that it may be as much about building trust and connection between older persons and the service provider as the provision of information. And the intent and outcome stages are straightforward. In our example, the hypothetical outreach service will deliver just-in-case prompts and referrals for free and independent financial information and advice. Where ill health may be impacting on retirement plans, time in hospital may be an ideal window for older persons to think about financial decisions. The outcome of just-in-time outreach will be to allow these older persons to seek out financial information and advice on key financial decisions. So, for example, taking out National Seniors membership. Now, this is the original table for the identifying the purpose of outreach step, drawn from the Law and Justice Foundation publication that you can see. I've included it to show how just-in-case outreach and outreach aimed at problem notices might be framed. Using our hospital example, the face-to-face outreach service could be developed over time to provide just-in-time prompts and referrals. For example, through networking with nurses and social workers, clients who might be facing involuntary retirement for health reasons could be identified. These clients can then be provided with referrals to financial counsellors and via free financial information pathways. In terms of targeting problem notices, as Farrell notes, equipping non-legal workers and professionals with information can be an effective way to give help and provide a pathway to services, especially those otherwise isolated and unable to act alone to resolve those issues. On the next slide, our hypothetical will include the use of community legal education to help make hospital staff aware of the service, and that's an example of using problem noticer outreach. I've mentioned a couple of times that service partners may opt to use an existing outreach model to deliver financial protection services. Alternatively, the Outreach Guide and Scoping Survey refer to different types of outreach that might be adopted. Practical considerations for setting up these different forms of outreach are included in the outreach preparation checklist. Working through the list, we have community legal education outreach, which encompasses information sessions in the community aimed at encouraging older persons to take steps to prevent problems arising and encourage action when they occur, for example, planning for later life decision-making, according to Farrell. Face-to-face service delivery includes setting up an outreach drop-in information service, an information desk or outreach information referral service on a scheduled basis in a location in the community, aimed at establishing a trusted presence within the wider community and outside the service partner's usual place of business. Co-delivery outreach would involve the inclusion of financial protection service information and referrals alongside co-delivered services, say legal or financial counselling referral pathway contacts, or within existing service partner services. Multi-agency clinics are where multiple agencies, for example service partners and legal, financial or social worker referral pathways, utilise one location for face-to-face outreach on a rotating basis or provide joint outreach, where multiple agencies are available at one location on the same day. Mixed service delivery includes rotating between a range of outreach options and the options of introducing technological outreach. This form of outreach aims to eliminate barriers and increase service accessibility, according to Brown. In our example, the financial protection service will be integrated into an existing face-to-face based outreach service and will use community legal education to promote the service to hospital staff. So to give another example, and building from the earlier statistics about accessing older people during leisure time, community legal education outreach could also be offered to volunteering and social groups in the community. So, for example, culturally and age-specific health and social service providers, church groups, clubs and societies that are specifically for older people or strongly associated with them. The service provider could write and offer to give talks on relevant topics, and talks could also be arranged at community centres, seniors expos and libraries to reach those older persons who might not be attached to those sort of organisations. National Seniors also have branches throughout Queensland where people get invited to give talks. Now, this step of the outreach scoping survey is to decide on the screening process to be used during outreach. Generally speaking, where formal screening is to be undertaken, there must be space for a private, confidential, consensual discussion with the older person. Where only informal screening will occur, conversations and observations can occur without the need for an exclusive private discussion place. The decision about which screening process to use will depend on an assessment that balances a number of considerations. These are the setting and what it dictates for best practice. So it's expected that many outreach services will only undertake informal screening. The need for undertaking client intake and maintaining privacy and confidentiality may mean that formal screening and facilitated referral will only be practical in an in-house setting. The second step is the subject and what it dictates for best practice. Outreach scoping should include consideration of older persons, their needs, vulnerabilities, and contextual factors as they occur in each community. Finally, the screening process itself and any inherent limitations. Answering formal screening questions will require the older person to be willing to disclose personal details about their life. This should happen after client intake, as they will need to provide the name of any other party involved. Informal screening is likely to be a much more appropriate tool where disclosure is not offered or the setting is inappropriate. However, informal screening processes do have their limitations. For example, informal screening tools such as Gut Instinct might not be sufficient for adequate screening at a community legal education event where contact with the older person is brief and there are many distractions. In our example, a decision has been made to undertake information screening during outreach and refer suspected cases of financial abuse in-house. The next step is to plan the location. According to Farrell, outreach should be delivered in a familiar and trusted location. However, Farrell also notes that confidentiality, privacy, and safety are equally important considerations. Effective outreach services will be those that target venues frequented by older persons without family members, account for the social stigma associated with seeking legal help, and the need for privacy and confidentiality in outreach conversations. Taking into account the research on how older persons respond to screening processes, a client-centred approach to screening during outreach includes ensuring the environment is comfortable and accommodates any sensory limitations. The conversation is engaging, warm, empathetic, and non-judgmental. Any screening conversations must be confidential, consensual, and ethical. And being discreet and adaptive, taking into account there's a possibility that older persons will attend in the company of a perpetrator. Existing service partner policies and procedures should apply to the provision of outreach. For example, work health safety, confidentiality, and other relevant policies for outreach. Service partners should carefully check that these policies are adequately drafted to cover outreach services and that workers have training in the use of policies and procedures in an outreach setting. In particular, there is a possibility that the older person will attend in the company of a perpetrator. If formal screening is to be undertaken, there must be space for private, confidential, consensual discussion with the older person. And information referral should not be provided to or in the presence of third parties unless this is explicitly consented to by the older person. This needs to be handled carefully. Farrell reminds us that location alone is not enough to reach service users. It's important for the service to be promoted through agencies, groups, and individuals known and trusted by the target group. This will include services who may be community problem notices or host agencies. The use of community-based problem notices has been successfully adapted in programs responding to elder abuse and domestic violence here and overseas. For example, a program in Victoria uses hairdressers to spot signs of domestic violence, and a program in the USA uses Meals on Wheels and RSPCA workers to identify elder abuse. Such programs are premised on the idea that community members are uniquely placed within existing care and trust relationships to notice people at risk. According to Hodgins, in regional communities, professionals like hairdressers, bank managers, agricultural suppliers, and vets have a crucial yet often overlooked role in looking after the mental health of their community. The Outreach Guide offers some examples of key local community problem notices that might be utilised. Selecting an outreach venue with a host provider who has an existing relationship with local older persons will be another opportunity to promote the service. Farrell points out that where there is low service user uptake, time can be given to local networking and relationship building with the host provider. Key referral services should be identified during outreach scoping, and these can be contacted for promotional purposes. A step-by-step guide for contacting and promoting the service to key services in the community is set out in the Outreach Guide. In our example, the outreach venue is the key promotion point, and efforts have been made to speak to other local services and involve financial counsellors. Effective outreach must be underpinned by client-centred conversations with people in their communities. As client-facing professionals, we expect that service providers will be fully aware of the transformative impact conversations can have. When we talk about conversation, we mean communication that is a conduit of storytelling, sharing personal perspectives, present circumstances, and future aims. For the Financial Protection Service, this means both speaking about financial decision making and listening to older persons with genuine curiosity and interest. As Tippett reminds us, the point of listening is to bring our lives into conversation, which in its original meaning is to live among, be familiar with, keep company. Tippett goes on to note that conversation is not just about words passing between mouth and ears, it's about shared life, keeping company with someone even for 5 minutes, showing genuine curiosity and asking good questions. A good conversation is founded on trust, which should be earned before the conversation by spending time in the community. Given that the Financial Protection Service is a new service and the fluidity of the outreach model, it's also hoped that the lived experience of service users can help to shape our responses to vulnerability. As Walsh aptly puts it, far from listening to clients' irrelevant ramblings merely out of kindness or compassion, or as a demonstration of empathy, storytelling is considered valuable because it exposes another reality and suggests alternative avenues for social change. In adopting this approach, the Financial Protection Service aims to achieve a greater understanding about the particular perceptions and needs of local communities throughout Queensland. At the end of the webinar training, we'll present conversation skills from Senior Social Worker Helen Wallace and President of Financial Counselling Queensland, Jan Perkins. As indicated on the slide, rather than explicitly focusing on financial abuse, the outreach conversations will focus on key financial decisions and proactive action areas where financial information and advice may lead to greater financial resilience and be protective against financial abuse. Simple doable behaviours may be things like contacting a referral service or using a Money Smart calculator. Taking a person-centred approach includes adapting delivery of the service to suit the individual. And finally, when deciding whether to use a screening process and interpreting answers, the older person should be viewed as an individual who exists within immediate family and close network members, formal and informal supports, the wider community, and who is impacted on by wider social and economic forces, On a practical level, this requires taking time to speak to an older person before deciding whether formal screening is appropriate, what process to use, and how to interpret the response.